A couple of years ago, I was drowning in unsold pieces. It felt like everything I did was absolutely worthless. But then I discovered that there's a hidden force galleries know about that dictates the price of your art. And if you tap into this force, you sell 10 times more. And the way I discovered it all started when an innocent mistake at an art fair transformed my career forever. Let me explain. So we arrive at the fair, I nervously unpack my art and brought one test piece with me that I've tried to sold, but nobody wanted to buy it. I wanted to test it out on this fair. Anyway, my heart is pounding in my chest because I've paid thousands of dollars to be here, basically all of my savings, and so this fair needs to work. We install the work, and I tell to my friend to price the new test piece at $500. And when I came back from my round, I was absolutely blown away. The test piece actually sold. Now what's more is that she misunderstood what I said, and instead of pricing it at $500, she priced it at $5,000. Now it becomes more interesting. At the end of the fair, none of my $1,000 pieces sold. The pieces that actually had proof of work didn't sell, and the one piece that was accidentally mispriced was the one that was sold. And so I couldn't understand this. What is happening? How is this possible? And then a dealer explained this to me. She said, number one, collectors first see the price and then they see the art. And number two, collectors in London start to get interested at the 2 to 3K price point, nothing below that. I bet if you would have priced your art higher, you would have sold more. And so what's the lesson here? Well, oftentimes, our fears and perceptions undervalue our own work more than anybody else ever could. And so it's not about changing the art, but about changing the way we see our own art and present it to the world. And so this is a very powerful concept. I want you guys to understand. Context matters. A charcoal that is sold in a village gallery somewhere in Spain for $800 will be sold in a London gallery for $8,000. Same artist, same art, different context. There is something about the London art scene that enables galleries to charge 10 times more for the same art. And this is something that galleries don't want to talk about. They don't want to admit that an artwork that's being sold for 10K in London would be sold for $1,000 in a village gallery in Spain. They basically don't want to admit that there is a $9,000 London tax that collectors are paying. And so a natural question that follows is, what do you say when a collector asks you why you charge $2,000 or why you charge $10,000? You can't really say, well, I'm here in London, so I price it 10 times higher than 2 weeks ago in Bangladesh. You can't really say that. And so how do you go about it? How do you explain those price points? Well, this is where we get towards these pricing formulas. Some artists will use a price per inch formula, $5 per inch, for example, but this is not really reliable. Other artists will do something like hours plus material cost, but this is also kind of BS. Let's take the following example. Let's take an artist that spends 20 hours on a particular piece, and then another artist that is less good, less efficient, and just less skilled, and they will spend 60 hours to get an artwork of the same quality. Now, does this mean that the better artist, who was more efficient, should charge 3 times less because they were faster? Of course not. This doesn't make any sense. And so the hourly rate plus material costs is just a bad method. As a painter, I oftentimes, when I'm painting, experience some kind of flow state where somehow, for some reason, everything just goes way better. Everything goes automatic. Everything goes smooth. And the paintings that are created in those states, they are not only created faster, but they're just better paintings. These are my favorite paintings. And so what happens when you have a favorite painting? Well, you will market it more. You will talk about it more. You will put it in the spotlight more. And so naturally, that will have an impact on the price of those paintings. In other words, oftentimes, the less time I spend on a particular painting, the more I will charge for that painting, because hourly rate just doesn't really matter that much. There's this beautiful story about Picasso that blew my mind away the first time I heard it, that illustrates this perfectly. So he's doodling on a napkin in some kind of restaurant, and he's about to throw it away. And before he can throw it away, a woman stops him in his tracks and says, wow, that's beautiful. Can I buy this? How much would you charge? And Picasso replies with $5,000. Now, she's obviously shocked. She's blown away. How can you charge $5,000 for a doodle on a napkin that you were about to throw away? Not to mention that it only took you a couple of minutes to make this. And Picasso replied, well, it only took me minutes to make, but it took me a lifetime to get the skill sets to make it in a couple of minutes. And he walked off. And so one of the questions becomes, how can we develop that Picasso mindset so that we can start charging what we're worth and actually make money from our art? Well, I have developed an exercise that will help you develop that Picasso mindset. I'll share it for free without giving me your email address or any of that stuff at the end of the video. And I'll also share all of the things that will impact the price of your art so that you can finally demystify selling your art. Again, at the end of the video, but for now, let's dive a little bit deeper into these concepts. The question I get asked a lot, and with asked a lot, I mean, nobody asked me this, but I want to talk about it, is how and when do you raise your prices? Because here's the thing, there is a trick that top-level artists use, a slightly underwhelming trick, but a trick nonetheless, to make sure that whenever they raise their prices, they actually sell their art. So let's talk about this. Well, the main thing that you want to make sure of is that no matter what happens, your prices year over year go upwards or stay the same. The reason you want to do this is because people will first look at the price and then at the art. In other words, when they see that the price is going upwards, they will invent a reason for why it is going upwards, and the same is true for when it goes down. They will invent a reason for why it is going down. And that's not what you want, because that reason will always be to your detriment. And so what does that mean? Making sure that your prices go upwards? Well, it means that whenever you raise your prices, your artworks actually sell. And so how do these top-level artists do this? Well, the most common way that these top-level artists do this is to make sure that they have a waiting list of potential buyers whenever they are raising their prices, so that there's not enough art available, but there are way too many buyers to buy the art. And so the question becomes, how can you generate a waiting list of potential collectors ready to buy your work? Well, at some point, you will have to start thinking about making different art that is more attractive to potential buyers, a different type of art that generates that waiting list. And there's one mindset trick that will help you go towards that art, develop your art to go towards that position. It's something that all artists that you look up to have done at some point in their career, and it's something that I've been doing for years on end. And so let's talk about this. Here's what you have to do. You ask yourself the following question: what would an artwork worth $100,000 for me look like? What would an artwork worth $200,000 that I made look like? Now, this is supposed to be a very challenging question. If this is not challenging to you, then increase the number to $500,000, whatever you need, and then you allow yourself 15 minutes to really contemplate, to really think about that art, or to really create it in your mind. Now, the goal of this exercise is not to have some artwork that is realistic, that you can in fact make in 1 week time or something. The goal is to allow your brain to go that far, to envision that future far beyond your wildest dreams. And this is a strategy that famous artists do all of the time. In 1990, Jim Carrey wrote himself a check for $4 million for acting services rendered. He put it in his wallet and looked at it on a daily basis. In 1994, he achieved a result that was fairly similar. And so we see these strategies, these manifestation type of strategies all of the time. Now, a possible answer to this question just out of the top of my head is, for example, let's say you make a painting, a commission for the World Championship of Boxing where Mayweather fights some other boxer, and you scrape the blood from the floor after the boxing match. You use that blood in your painting to create this scene of the boxing match. Now, it's obvious that this painting would sell for at least $100,000, probably way more, because the people pay tens of thousands of dollars for ringside seats. On the black market, it probably goes for $100K or above. So if they are willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to watch the match, they're probably also willing to pay $100K for a painting. Now, the quality of the idea at this stage doesn't really matter. The point is that you allow your brain to go that far, that you visualize it, that you plant this seed for the future inside of your brain so that you can slowly grow towards that future. Now, if for some reason this exercise is too hard, or you just don't have the inspiration at this moment, I created a couple of prompts that can help you, that can inspire you in some kind of way. So let's read a couple of them. Prompt number 1. Imagine designing an artwork for a space station capturing the vastness of the universe. What elements would you incorporate and how would that look? Another prompt could be, if you were commissioned to create an art piece for the next Olympics, what would that art piece be? You can create your own prompts as well. I've made a list of 20 prompts. I will give it at the end of the video that can fuel that inspiration. Now, once you have that 100K future in front of you, we have to go down to the next phase of this exercise and ask ourselves how we are going to justify that price point and subsequently go towards that future. Now, this is where it becomes interesting because there are a couple of ways to justify price points to make your art more attractive and generate that waiting list. The first strategy is to use expensive materials. A good example of this is Damien Hirst for The Love of God, where he made a sculpture using 8,601 diamonds. And this obviously increased the price of the artwork because diamonds are pretty expensive. Now, the interesting thing about this artwork is that it generated a halo effect and made all of the other artworks from Damien Hirst more valuable through association. And so sometimes I wonder if Damien Hirst generated this artwork for the sole reason to make all of his other work more valuable. I'm not sure. Let me know in the comments what you think, but he does seem like a very cunning businessman that would be able to do something like that. Now, one of the problems with using expensive materials is that they are really expensive. And let's face it, I don't have money to buy 8,600 diamonds to use in my artwork. And so what is another strategy? A strategy that is more for beginner artists that we can actually execute on. Well, one thing you could do is to use materials that are designed to indirectly influence the price of your art. A good example of this is Chris O'Feely, who uses elephant dung in his paintings. The elephant dung is very controversial, and so a lot of magazines will write about it because it's so controversial, because it's so strange, it's such a strange material, and because they are writing about it, the value of the art goes up. And so this is a strategy that a lot of artists use. I've used this myself as well when I was making painting series with chemical reactions. Fubis was writing about it. The only reason they wrote about it was because it was a very interesting material that nobody else was using. And I've used this multiple times. At one point I was making paintings with lightning, which was an extremely interesting process to paint with. So interesting that people wanted to write about it. One article in Vice was titled, "If Zeus would be a painter, he would be making paintings like these Ketels." And so the only reason they wrote about that is because it was a very interesting method. Very easy strategy to uplift the price of your art. And then one last way to use materials to increase the value of your art is to use them in order to generate depth and story. Story that builds an emotional connection with the viewer. A good example of this is the artwork Self by Mark Quinn. Now, if I told you that this artwork that you're seeing is a self-portrait made by the artist, you might be interested in the artwork, you might rate it at a 4 and 10. If I would, however, tell you that this is an artwork made from frozen blood, suddenly it becomes more interesting. If I would tell you it's not just frozen blood, it's frozen blood from the artist himself, suddenly it becomes even more interesting. Now you might rate the artwork at a 6.5 from 10 or something. But if I would tell you, however, that the artist has a medical condition called anemia that results in him not having enough red blood cells to carry oxygen to his tissue, a life-threatening condition, and the reason he makes these paintings of his own blood is as a fuck you towards the universe and to God and all of that stuff, suddenly, well, it becomes even more interesting just because we add that element of depth. Now, this whole story about anemia is of course not true. I made it up on the spot, but you get the idea. The point is made. If you increase the amount of emotional connection, the value of a particular piece goes up. The attraction that we have towards that piece goes up. Now, do you need particular materials to accomplish this? No, absolutely not. Phil Hansen is a very good example. He was a painter, tried to paint for years on end. And then he developed a tremble in his hand. He couldn't hold his hand still anymore, and so he couldn't paint anymore. And then after a couple of years, he couldn't let go. He started to make these very large paintings so that they were so big that if you would watch them from a distance, it would all start to become realistic, some kind of pantheistic principle or something. And now he is a famous artist doing that. And you can clearly see how this story of developing this medical condition and then overcoming it makes the art more valuable. Somehow, when we have that emotional connection and we see that story, it becomes an amazing piece. Otherwise, it's just kind of an average piece. And so this is the power of story. A story can be an unfair advantage that makes your art more valuable to people. As promised, on the screen you have a list of all the things that will impact the price of your work. And so what does this mean for beginner artists? Well, it means that you will have to spend time investigating your life, figuring out what unfair advantages you have, what unique situations that you experience in your life that nobody else experienced, and then use those to your advantage. And this doesn't have to be an extreme background story with medical conditions or anything like that. Let's give an example. Let's say you were born in Russia, you were raised there for 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, and then you came to London and now you're an artist doing stuff in London. Well, in that particular scenario, your Russian background will be a competitive market advantage if you would collaborate with galleries that have a lot of Russian clients. And so in that particular scenario, it's obvious you have a shared background, you can talk in their language and stuff like that. Of course, that's going to be competitive for market advantage. Of course, this is going to help you sell more than those same artists who grew up in London, for example. Now, I talk to a lot of artists regularly, and they are simply not aware of their competitive market advantages, or they see it as a negative. For example, they will say that their Russian accent is a disadvantage because now they can make English videos on YouTube. Who said it's a disadvantage? You just made that up. Of course, it's a disadvantage in that particular scenario that you chose, but it's an advantage in another scenario. And so becoming aware of that, reframing the negatives or positives in your life so that they start helping you instead of bringing you down. And so a large portion of becoming a successful artist is making sure that you place yourself in the right context where your unique, personal, unfair advantages will in fact be unfair advantages. And so the question becomes, how can we figure out our own unique competitive market advantages, unfair advantages that are true to our lives, that no other artist has, so that we can start using them to become successful artists? And the process to go about this is very easy. This is actually something that I haven't done myself. The first thing in this video that I have no experience with, but if I would go about it, here's what I would do. I would take 30 minutes a day to write down all of the mundane things that happened in my life, all of the personality traits, everything that I take for granted. And then I would go to ChatGPT. For those of you who don't know what it is, it's an artificial intelligence that you can ask questions to. It knows everything. It can answer every question you have. And so you go to ChatGPT and you type in the following prompt. You say, ChatGPT, these are aspects of my life, my experiences, my personalities, and I have a question. How can I leverage these unique things about me and transform them in competitive market advantage for my art career? In what situations can I put myself in that these things that I just described, that I just gave you, would be competitive market advantage, unfair advantages that would further my career? And then ChatGPT will give you an answer that will shed light on some of the unfair advantages that you have, but didn't even know you had. Now, there's one more thing that I have to mention, and this is probably the most important aspect of this whole 100K mindset trick that we've talked about, because a lot of artists, they don't actually have a problem with selling their art at $100,000. They have a problem with uploading their art for sale. They have a problem with posting their art online. They have a problem with these beginner steps. And so they think by themselves, well, I have a problem with these beginner steps, and so this 200K mindset trick is actually not going to help you. But here's the thing. The reason you're afraid of publishing your art for sale or going to an art fair or starting a YouTube channel is because you've made that thing that you want to do way bigger than it actually is. There's no reason to actually be afraid of it. And the powerful thing that will happen if you do this 100K mindset trick is that publishing your art for sale becomes an easy task in the face of your 500K future, which makes it easier to actually try to do those things. Starting a YouTube channel becomes an easy task in the face of your 500K future. And so the impact is actually that you are going to have an easier time starting your art business right now in the next couple of weeks by doing that. Goethe said it beautifully when he said, "Dream no small dreams, for they have no power to move the hearts of men." And so the power of dreaming big is that you get energy from it to tackle the small tasks ahead of your journey. And as promised, here are a couple of prompt questions to inspire you to get towards that Picasso mindset, to get towards that 100K future. And if you want to play it next level, make sure to write your answers in the comment section to send them out into the future. Now, there's one more thing that is standing in our way to become a successful artist. In the beginning of this video, I talked about the impact that context has on the sales of your art. But we didn't talk about what the best context actually is. What is the best place to sell your art? And to answer that question, I made a video, best place to sell your art online, links in the description and the end screen. That said, get the hell out of here.